Today I'll be touring the Antalya province. My first stop are the Kurnsunlu Waterfalls.
Çayır çimen geze geze of, çayır çimen geze geze of. Oldum ben bir geveze, kızına gönül verdim, darılma hanım teyze, of nenem of. Kızına gönül verdim, darılma hanım teyze, of nenem of.
So beautiful. Right behind me you can see the Kurnsunlu Waterfalls, also known as the Seven Falls, because there's about 7 different falls here that plummet about 50 feet off the cliff into a series of about 7 pools that are interconnected with
Streams and cascades.
And there's not a whole lot of water this time of the year. The ones that we saw in Antalya were more spectacular. Ooh.
My next stop is the ancient city of Perge.
Surface of the rigid, etc. Still, we don't know how big it is. They keep discovering more and more sections in the Roman bath, and you need to cool down, not to bring disease into the city.
Oh wow, it's absolutely incredible. I'm in the ancient city of Perge, and the city was founded around the 13th century BC and was once the capital of Pamphylia Secunda, and it was here where St. Paul the Apostle and St. Barnabas began their first mission in Anatolia. Alexander the Great also used it as a base for his invasion of the interior in 333 BC. It was also the birthplace of Greek astronomer and mathematician Apollonius, as well as the seat of worship for Queen Artemis. It was founded by the Greeks. Most of what we see today was built by the Romans, who first arrived here around 188 BC. The Persians also captured the city for a brief period. At its prime, the city was home to around 150,000 people. It was during the Roman and Byzantine period that the city experienced its golden age, but the city was ultimately abandoned during the Seljuk invasion of 1000 AD. The city remained buried in the ground until it was described by a Polish archaeologist in the 19th century. Excavations have been carried out continuously for nearly 7 decades, with at least 3/4 of the city still to be uncovered. Right behind me is the Roman gate, and now right behind me is the original Hellenistic gate. The city's most iconic features date from around 120 AD and were once beautifully adorned with marble and statues of Greek deities and the city's founders. Right here we have the remains of the best preserved Roman baths in Turkey, and they contain both hot and cold water and even a central heating system.
They would heat the water elsewhere. The water would go, this section would be
Well, this right here is the 4th century agora, and right in the center of it was a circular temple. Right over here we have the remains of some 5th and 6th century Byzantine churches. Right up there we have the remains of the theater.
It was built in the 2nd century AD and combines Greek and Roman elements, and it had a capacity of 15,000.
Well, this is the Perge Stadium, and it's the second best preserved ancient stadium in Turkey. It was built in the 2nd century AD and could accommodate up to 12,000 spectators. It was 770 feet long, 111 feet wide, and had 12 rows of seats. The north end of the stadium was a gladiatorial arena. The stadium also had these large vaults you see right here, which would contain shops, kind of like today's stadiums. And here's another interesting fact: both the stadium and the theater were actually located outside the city walls, and that's because they were both used for international competitions, and the townspeople wanted to keep lousy foreigners out of their fancy city. Many of its relics are actually currently housed in the Archaeological Museum in Antalya. But sadly, in recent years, the city has become a popular site for grave robbers who live in the houses next to the ruins. So who knows how many of its incredible treasures have been lost. Look around me and tell me if you see anything strange. If this was in Italy or Greece, this place would be swarming with tourists. I actually read that in the past decades, the ruins in Turkey have actually been seeing a lot less tourists who prefer to spend their entire holiday on the beach. I don't think those people should even be saying they've been to Turkey. I think it's a sin to come to Turkey and not experience any of this, because the country's truly got a fascinating history and culture. I also heard from some locals that the current government has sort of been allowing the sites to degrade a little bit, but I personally don't mind having this incredible place to myself. This is probably my favorite place in Turkey so far. I actually like it even more than Cappadocia. Visiting a site like this is something that has been on my bucket list for a long time, and I actually have visited Greco-Roman ruins before in Greece and Spain, but they were nowhere as impressive as these. These are some true Greco-Roman ruins right here. And it's kind of funny I had to come to Turkey to finally see some proper ones.
From Perge, I continue east to the ancient city of Aspendos. We're on our way to Aspendos. We've stopped for lunch in this small village just outside of the archaeological site. Right below me is the Kopru River. Just over there is the archaeological site, which we'll be visiting after lunch. It's about 20 degrees warmer here than it was in Cappadocia. It's gonna be around 95 to 100 degrees right now. Here's our lunch for the day. A mix of local and Western. I already know I'm gonna enjoy the chicken. A real Turkish village.
They could be proud of their mustache, or even sometimes.
I'm in the ancient city of Aspendos, founded around 1000 BC by Greeks from Argos. It was settled by the Hittites around 800 BC.
The wide range of its coinage throughout the ancient world indicates that in the 5th century BC, Aspendos had become the most important city in Pamphylia, and gained a vast wealth through trading salt, oil, and wool. The city fell to the Persians in 546 BC, and unlike other cities, the Persians had allotted Aspendos some degree of freedom. Alexander the Great marched into Aspendos in 333 BC. In 190 BC, the city was surrendered to the Romans. It was under Roman rule that the city truly began to prosper. When the Seljuks conquered the region in the 13th century, they still described Aspendos as a strong city. But like all great cities, it was ultimately abandoned, this time due to the silting of its harbor and the centralization policies of the Byzantine Empire. That structure we see up there was originally a public and administrative building that was converted to a Christian church during the Byzantine period. Right down there is the ruins of the Aspendos Stadium. That is the famous
Aspendos Amphitheater, the best preserved and most completely intact amphitheater in the world. Now, this spectacular theater was built by the Romans in the 2nd century AD and had a capacity of between 12,000 to 20,000 people. The seating capacity was maybe around 12,000, but then there were also a lot of standing spots, and who would be doing the standing? Women and slaves. Only the men would be doing theater performances, and the reason they wore masks was so they wouldn't get in trouble because they often mocked politicians. The acoustics of the theater are allegedly so good that you can hear the drop of a ping pong ball down there all the way up at the very top.
Once upon a time, there was a very strong king here, and he was very much proud of it. Of course, he was princess, and everybody wanted to. We decided that whoever is originating his daughter, he should continue to do. They came forward, and one said, I will build. The other brother said, shall construct and activate. By the time they finished, he was very much impressed with the whole of the building. He couldn't make his mind up. He decided that he should kill his daughter. He knew half of her to eat her. The one who built the theater didn't like the idea, and he said, I don't want to do it. In the end, the king was clever enough to really love her, and she married the one who killed him. What happened to the other one? The king decided to kill him, so he chopped him. They could kill it with water, and they were using it to practice when they had to go into battle against the pirates. When you talk in here, people can hear you on the top. When they do performances, they don't need the mic.
98% of the theater is still original, and the theater's amazing condition thanks largely in part to the Seljuks. Normally when the Seljuks were invading Turkey, they would destroy everything in sight that was here, but they were actually so impressed with the theater that they decided to utilize it for their own needs, converting it into a caravanserai, making reparations to it, and also adding several distinctly Seljuk features to it. And another person who was impressed by this theater was Ataturk. He decided to make even more renovations on it, much to the displeasure of local archaeologists, and still used today for several annual festivals and performances. Honestly, looking at the picture, I didn't think I'd like this one, because I'm used to seeing the front of it all in ruins, but I have to say that I think this one is actually my favorite theater in Turkey.
My last stop of the day is the historic seaside town of Side.
Çayır çimen geze geze of, çayır çimen geze geze of. Oldum ben bir geveze, kızına gönül verdim, darılma hanım teyze. Of nenem of, kızına gönül verdim, darılma hanım teyze. Of nenem of, yanma yüreğim yanma, ayrılık bize düştü. Of nenem of.
This is nice. We're in the historic coastal town of Sidon, which is Greek for pomegranate.
Hellenized in the 4th century BC after the conquest of Alexander the Great, the city had a reputation for being the most infamous slave port in the Mediterranean from the 2nd century BC to 66 BC, during which time it was under the control of Kilkian pirates. Though piracy was eradicated after the Roman conquest of 103 BC, the slave trade continued. In fact, the city's vast amount of wealth was thanks almost exclusively to the slave trade. Raids by bandit tribes in the 4th century contributed to the city's decline, as did the rise of Christianity, which resulted in the destruction of its pagan shrines, temples, and baths. Finally, in the 7th century AD, the city was sacked and burned by Arab invaders and was ultimately abandoned in the 12th century, only to be used by squatters and the occasional traveler. In 1895, Turkish Muslims from Crete migrated to this region as refugees and began constructing their own city atop the ruins of the ancient settlement, a city which they called Selimiye. It is this that eventually developed into what's now Sida's Old Town. In recent years, the city developed even further with the construction of resorts along its picturesque coast. Now, because of its sensitive archaeological site, only residents are actually permitted to drive into the Old Town, so the only way for visitors to come in is to walk in or take this cute little trams. This temple you see behind me is dedicated to the Greek god of music, poetry, and the sun. That god was none other than the great Apollo. And this temple was built in the 2nd century AD and is Sida's most famous landmark. I actually find it quite interesting that they decided to keep the original Greek names. Right here we can actually see where an Ottoman doorway has been incorporated into the original Greek structures. Right here is the Agora with its famous rotunda in the center. The spectacular structure you see behind me is the Nymphemium. It was built in the 2nd century AD, and a nymphemium was basically an enormous ornate ritual fountain. The most beautiful structure in the entire city. Yeah. And we have the remains of the state agora. What is it? Some kind of chameleon? Yeah, chameleon.
It's a baby.
Oh yeah. Oh nice. So thanks for showing me.
Taşı, gelen geçen atar taşı. Benim yarim kalem taşı. Benim yarim kalem taşı. Var ara eşini, eşini bay bay. Say sana liraların beş.
You do a big break.
Did you go to the YouTube?
We went to Perge, Aspendos, and Sida. Yeah, and the Kurnsunlu, but the waterfalls weren't that nice because there wasn't much water.
I think because of the weather. Yeah, maybe you can.
After rain, yeah?
Maybe you
Yeah.
can come back winter.
But winter is cold, yeah?
Yeah.
How many degrees? It's snowing.
I think it's not too much. It's average 20 degrees.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all. At least 15 degrees.
Can we follow us?